Okay.
Go. See a lot more people requesting to join now. So we'll get started in a few minutes or less. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the July edition of our Adobe Marketo Engage Champion office hours. Before we get started with your questions and some open discussion, let's just quickly start with some housekeeping slides. So this is one of a wider selection of Marketo user groups, a dedicated champion office hours user group. So it follows the same house rules as all our sessions. So please, if you come off mute to say anything, please no self-promotion or pitching anything. Also goes for chat. Please also, we ask that you don't request contact people from this without prior consent to that. And if any of our panelists or anyone shares a question, we do ask you that you please keep that confidential unless you have prior consent from them for sharing that information further. Try to keep this a safe space. This session is also going to be recorded. So if you're not okay with that, feel free to leave the meeting now. As I said, it is recorded. It will be up available on the mug page where you registered for this event, or I believe on YouTube afterwards as well. So you can find it, come back and listen to the answers to the conversation. We also invite you to stay invited to the chapter. Hopefully you did this on registering. You could select and say, add me to a chapter so you get informed about future invites. But if you haven't done that, from the event page afterwards, this link will be clickable, but from that event page, you can also find any of the mug user groups that you're interested in, sign up to become a member, and then you will get invites as events get scheduled. That doesn't necessarily need to be for your own city or country. You see that there'll be many available. Quite often there are virtual sessions, which you'll see soon in the upcoming list. So you can always register for those as well. So some of those upcoming chapter meetings and events that I mentioned. One of them is a Q&A coffee break. I believe that's in a few hours time after this. So if you've got space today, jump on that. A QA coffee break is all done through the community, a community thread. So if you're a member of the Marketo Experience League community, you can see that, see the conversation there as well. And there's also going to be the skills exchange coming up in August. So that's going to be over 5 days. Some of our, I think some of the champs, even some experts on Marketo will be sharing their best tips and tricks and skills there. So again, something to register for. If you can do that, again, links will be shared, or do a search for this, or if you have a chance, QR code if I'm not too fast flicking through the slides. There's also a really exciting one, a new learning path launched within the Experience League recently. So this is all about new administrators looking to set up your own onboarding and implementation of your instance. A lot of the champions in the community have worked and developed content for this, so it's solid stuff. You know, it's from some people that have been through this many times. So if you can have a good look through that, you can also navigate to it from the Experience League, I think under a tab of learning and then tutorials, and then you should be able to find this content there. And the upcoming user groups I mentioned. So quite a few, as we can see, a lot are all virtual in this case. So it doesn't matter if you're not local to that area, feel free to sign up virtually and attend online like you are for this event. As you can see, quite a few coming up with some really interesting and diverse topics. Sports marketing, nice, very topical. I think this time of year, a lot of sports competitions and Olympics coming up for that, as well as some outside the US. So for those that are leaving different time zones, also a few more coming up there as well. And on to today's office hours session. So hi, I'm John, moderator for the session today. I work at Accenture, specifically focused on marketing technology, Adobe technology, and my background is most heavily in Marketo for that one. Let's quickly go around our panelists for today. We'll ask everyone to do a quick intro. And one of the questions that came up that you submitted on registering for the event, I thought it was quite a nice question. Too nice for one champ to answer, so I was hoping we could all try to incorporate this into our intro. And that question was, have you built any programs or campaigns recently that you're quite excited about? I think a lot of inspiration for our attendees as well coming from this one. So Charlie, maybe you want to start this or start us off.
Hi, thanks, John. I'm Charlie Oakham from a company called Kanos. I'm a champion for this year. One of the campaigns that I've recently, custom programs that I set up was with an integration with a social media platform called Octopost. And this, what happens is leads come in from our social media platform, so people might engage with us or interact with our advocates in, say, LinkedIn. Octopost will push those leads across into our default workspace, and I've got a custom program that not only processes those guys into the right partition, but then also lead processes them, gives them the right kind of attribution, all from the tags that get passed across in a custom object. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Wow, nice. Okay, thanks, Charlie. Josh, over to you.
Josh Hampton.
Audio issue with Josh, but maybe Courtney can.
Sure, I can go. So I'm Courtney Toby. I'm a senior manager at Deloitte Consulting, specializing in marketing technology. I'm a 4-time Marketo champion and a Marketo certified solutions architect. And one of the campaigns that I recently helped a client stand up, we were really working on building out a full funnel lead nurturing strategy for them. So we were able to bring the right sales and marketing stakeholders to the table, get them to align on lead lifecycle stages, and even as simple as defining what an MQL meant for this organization. And we ended up putting that work into practice by launching a top of the funnel, always on lead nurturing campaign that enrolled individuals into different nurture streams based off of assumed pain points and product interests. So that was one that was pretty exciting to stand up for my client.
Nice. Thanks, Courtney. Josh, welcome back. Let's try it again.
Sure. So I'm Josh Hampton from Capdrill. We're a Marketo-only agency, working with Marketo for 15 years now. The latest campaign was we used AI to do scoring and qualification for leads, taking out the Marketo activity log of interesting moments, summarizing that and sending it over to sales for some interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And Corey.
Yeah, hey everyone. Corey Bayless, four-time Marketo champ, four-time MCE, cloud solutions, or cloud practitioner. So all the things, and yeah, super excited to be here. I've got a couple favorite campaigns. One was at AWS when COVID hit. Everything went digital, so we had to figure out how to overcome list import automation. And so we built this for all our tier 1 events like Innovate, and had to build a cloud integration Lambda from S3 from our third-party partner that was doing the data ingestion and push it directly into static lists within Marketo and not create duplicates. That was definitely a big one. The one that that I just did with Brittany Young at Prudential was a UTM-based financial advising picker, basically, where a customer picked the financial advisor and they would pass it into Marketo landing page, and it was a multi-language experience, and we had to make sure we preserved UTMs. So Brittany was helped architect and build out the page, but we had a UTM transfer problem, and I had to build some custom JavaScript that would pull the UTMs from the URL and pass them to whatever CTA the person clicked, so that we would maintain that data and it would pass through to Marketo. So if it was Spanish, then we would still be able to maintain all that data. So that was also a very cool little solution.
Nice. Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, Corey and everyone. So it sounds like we've got a pretty experienced panel here. So we'll go through some of the user-submitted questions that you entered as we registered for the event. However, if you do have additional questions, feel free to put them in the QA. I'll try and keep an eye on that as well and incorporate those in as we go through. But I think the first group of questions, I tried to put them in some logical order and themes just to keep the nice structure here. I think we all appreciate good structure working in the MOPS and Marketo. But the first question that I had was just about general list import and best practices there. I think, Courtney, maybe you want to have a go at answering that one?
Yeah, so I would say for a starting standpoint, really like putting some key practices and like steps of success into place at your organization before just setting people loose to do list imports. So what does that mean? Well, first and foremost, does it need to be a list import? Is it truly net new people that need to be added to the Marketo database? Or do these people already exist within Marketo? And is there a way to target them via smart list and pull them in that way? Because then you're not taking the chance of having data be overwritten or potentially creating duplicates, anything along those lines. So one, does it need to be a list import? If it does, then I really recommend putting together a template, a standardized list import template that you share with all of your practitioners. And that would have all the fields that you need to make sure they're incorporating into the list import the correct field attribute name. So you're ensuring you're mapping it to the right place. And then even adding like a checks and balances, potentially having someone check that list just to make sure the fields are really mapping correctly before importing them in. So that's typically what I've done at past organizations and for my clients, but would love to hear from anyone else on the panel to see if they have any other recommendations.
Yeah, just to utilize block field updates in admin so that you can't have somebody unsubscribe data and do anything nefarious to protected fields. Super important to be able to restrict those.
Good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Nice. Let's keep it moving. There was another question very similar, well, similar on the concept of data, a lot of data, keeping your data clean. The question was specifically having a mammoth amount of data in the database. How can you regularly keep it clean by removing irrelevant records or bounces, things like that? So yeah, maybe Charlie, do you have any best tips that you do in your instance for keeping your data clean?
Right, I don't know anybody in the marketing ops, let alone Marketo world, that isn't constantly cleaning data. But funnily enough, this question comes at the right time because we're going through a mammoth clean of our instance at the moment. And what I can think of is actually trying to break it down into sort of specific areas. One, look at your inactive leads. Okay, look at the guys who haven't engaged in a particular time period. So we look at 180 days, haven't visited, haven't clicked, are still are still subscribed, because you'd want to sort of pull those guys out separately, but are completely inactive and not going to respond to any marketing that you would send their way. The next is obviously to look at invalids, and that goes into things like field data, but moreover, those mechanisms or those levers that you can use to communicate. So email, obviously. So pulling out of those bounces, not only invalid emails that Marketo identifies, but then also ones that fail. So anyone that's bounced in the past, or using tools to just run email addresses through. So we use Never Bounce. I know we're not promoting any sort of platforms here, John, but we use Never Bounce, and I've used Mailgun in the past just to check whether mail addresses are valid or not, and then get rid of junk ones as well. I'm sure we all have abc@abc.com, you know, try and remove as many as those guys. And then look at those sort of bad sources of data too. So we connect with multiple different API data sources that we are constantly seeing sort of data come and go. And it's very easy to identify one bad data source as the culprit for pushing large amounts of bad data into your instance. So try and look at cleaning up your integration points as well, because you don't want to start removing data out for it to then come back in bulk without you knowing. And then the last one is focus down on those sort of invalid data types as well. So a lot of bad data or unusable data comes from perhaps things that fail sync into CRM because the pick list values aren't quite right, or it won't segment into a group, into a smart list, because it doesn't fails kind of field matching. So have a look at, you know, trying to clean up a lot of that kind of invalid data. So for example, your country, you might be targeting the US of A, you might have US, America, you know, the lots of different sort of things that wouldn't necessarily pull into your smart list. So try and look at invalid pick list types as well. So there's some tips. Anyone else have any great tips there?
No, I think you touched a pretty comprehensive answer, but yeah,
There
definitely. Yeah, I think definitely finding the source. Everyone always talks about that, like turning the tap off where the leak is, or not so much the leak, but yeah, where the problem is, and working that out, coming in with your source, and then also in your kind of operational processing, data normalization processes, making sure that that's picking things up. Nice.
Yeah,
it seems like
actually wanted to say one thing on that, because you just brought it up. The original source type is the top of funnel in terms of how data is entering into your system, is a great way to start classifying all the different flows that are coming in. So if you really want to break it down, that's a great way to really start to be like, okay, what are all my data sources, where they're all coming from, and then you can break them down into each compartment and be able to review them at a much granular level. But yeah, super informative, Charlie, for sure.
Yeah. Something I'm going through at the moment, working on a few custom integrations feeding into Marketo, and we're really scoped out and really a lot of API feeding in, but hard coding or that the person source, so we know where is this coming from and tracking that data. We can look back and work out who's impacting.
And web services to see what APIs are hitting the system consistently is also another way of being like, what is, you know, that was one of the biggest ways I was able to really start to track down all the parts of how it was coming into the system. But really
and things like I think a notorious one for me is always LinkedIn lead ads, for example, where it likes to use its own countries and it sends country names, and the rest of my instance all works off the 2-character I. So knowing these things, tracking them back and working out where it's coming from. Sometimes you can't help them, but you can also then at least plan around it and mitigate for them. Nice. Okay, we'll keep moving on. There were two topics.
I've used.
Sorry, Josh.
Sorry. Another trick I've used sometimes when you're trying to track down issues with data is using segmentation. If you have 3 segments to use, that way it's different from Smart Lists, where you can see everything visualized exactly how people are falling into those groups, and you can set up rules for specific data issues that contains dash if you want to get rid of dashes and things like that.
Interesting. Yeah, nice. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, similar to the data topic, I think a nice segue into it. But we had a few questions as well about partitions. So helping manage your data. And I think yeah, the two questions that we had was, one is how to decide when it is time to start using partitions in your instance, and the other one is the best way to do efficient management of segmentations with workspaces and partitions in that case. So yeah, I don't know who we've got. Corey, Courtney, maybe you've got an idea where to start on this.
So I'll
start with the first one on working out when do you need partitions. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, so both of those questions kind of tail into each other, right? So I'm going to share this one with Courtney. So try not to take all of the. She's got some really cool specifics, and I've got some cool specifics. So basically, when I think of partitions, right, I think of partitions as miniature databases. Like you're actually creating a separate database in Marketo itself. So you have one instance of Marketo, and you have all these different little mini databases that can either see each other or they can't see each other. So in the instance of AWS, when I was at AWS, we had 32 workspaces. We had 15 different languages that we had to support across 7 or 8 different geos, can't remember the exact number, right? So for GDPR, as a direct example of where this is important, you've got regulations that happen in the United States, you've got regulations that happen in the EU, you've got regulations that happen in China, you've got all these different regulations, right? So you've got data restrictions that have to happen, and you also have geos that can only see their particular geo. So one great way that a partition can help with that is you have sort of a central source of truth where your administrative injection or intake for where data goes through, and then based off of specific criteria, in our case country, you can push them into each different geo, basically saying, okay, for the United States, we have all the US leads and contacts go into the US geo, and then for European, for GDPR specific things, they can go into the European geo. And so that's a great way to basically say, okay, I have an ecosystem of people with 1,200 or so users in the Marketo instance. I want those people to only market to their specific geo. I want US to only market to their specific geo. And that's a great way to kind of think about how a partition can really be helpful. So, Courtney, anything to add to that?
Yeah, that's a great example. I've also come across some unique instances of how partitions and workspaces are being used. So at a previous organization, we actually did a completely custom sync of leveraging one Marketo instance that integrated into 2 separate Salesforce instances. It was a really unique business case of why we needed to do that at that organization. And so we essentially set up the partitions as separate databases, bringing in information specific to those individual Salesforce instances, and set up workspaces that essentially allowed us to have like 2 separate, I guess, Marketo instances in one. There are some things to consider when you go that approach. Like by default, you can't have duplicates in partitions. And there were some instances where there were duplicates because the different Salesforce instances were supporting different business units. And individuals could be found in both because they were purchasing both products from both business units. And so we had to work with Marketo support to enable duplicates. And then we set up like a global workspace and a global partition that tried to identify when and where individuals needed to be pushed to the separate partitions, and also do more of that overarching database management in that workspace. So there are lots of different applications for it, but really the crux of making that decision, I feel like, is like honing in on the specific business need, and do these individuals need to be separated in such a way that a partition makes sense?
Yeah, and I think that's the key decision bit, is that separation. I think for that, is there a key need for some separation that one part of Marketo user base cannot access a certain part of data, and whether that be geo, business unit, or opco, or something like that is often the core bit. But then, of course, you don't want to go down the route of separate Marketo instances for that. You can just split your database, and then still leverage all the good things like a center of excellence workspace, where both workspaces could reference the same program templates and everything as well.
Okay, so let me push back on that. I want to push back on that one though, because like the center of excellence operations workspace. So like for people who get the opportunity to work on an enterprise built out Marketo instance, which isn't everyone, right? Because partitions and workspaces are only available in the enterprise editions, right? So you got to pay money to do it. But workspaces can be very taxing for somebody who's never used workspaces, right? You can't just copy something over to another workspace, right? You got to use programs in order to move things over. Forms are specific to the workspace, so you can't have multiple forms that are shared across workspace. It has to be each individual. So now all of a sudden, all your assets start to build and grow, and you basically start having this thing called Marketo technical debt that's going to really haunt you if you don't have a really good plan in place for how you want to do it, right? So I'll segue that into your efficient segmentation workspace conversation, right?
Yeah.
So you really want to look at what is your user base? How many people are actually using your system that's outside of the central team? As every MOPS practitioner is going to tell you, how many people are actually building outside, because it's my job to create a governance model that ensures that sandbox is nice and safe for everybody to market in, right? But I also don't want to get caught in a situation where I'm constantly cloning new things into different workspaces, and then my entire job is basically taken up as I'm just continuing to support our MOPS. I'm continuing to be essential support for MOPS as I continue to have to clone all these different assets and landing page templates or share these things with other workspaces so that they have access to them. Sometimes there's not a really good workaround around that, but if you don't have a really good grasp of how sharing things across workspaces works, what ends up happening is you forget, like Marketo, like when you try to search out, let's say, an email template that's actually shared across a workspace, right? Well, if you go to Design Studio and you were to actually click on that particular template, it would take you to the Design Studio section of that actual workspace, which might not actually be your master workspace where you can actually edit the template. So if you don't know how that functions, that can actually be really, really problematic for you, especially when you have hundreds of templates. When you have, I know it's crazy when you're like thinking like 11,000 forms in a system is just absolutely bonkers. You're right. And if you cross that across 32 workspaces, it's even more complex, right? So you really have to take into account like what is important for your business to function. And you always want to build with the minimalist mindset as possible. And if you do those things and you have that understanding of like some of the differences that happen when you incorporate workspaces, you incorporate partitions, it becomes a lot less tricky. Like for instance, if you're using a partition and you're injecting data in, but you have a routing rule in your partition that's actually pushing the person to a different partition based off of different criteria that falls on the record, all of a sudden the data is not where you expect it to be, and you're like, oh, where's my data? What happened to it? Well, it turns out that it went into another partition, right? So you really have to own and understand those functions before you execute them, because it can lead to a significant amount of confusion. And it definitely did for me as I was continuing to learn. So I'm trying to like fast pace that learning curve for people, is like study what that, before you execute, study what each one of those things do and all the ins and outs of those things, and then ask questions about those things. It will help you. It'll save you so much time if you actually are able to really digest that.
Yeah, no, good call out. Agree. I think a similar one that I came across when you do have like a centralized program template that you want to clone, just like calling webhooks and things like that. You can't call it across. And if you want to reference one that belongs to a certain area, requesting campaigns. And if you want to request one that belongs in a certain workspace, of course you can't have that you can't request across workspaces. So yeah, there's a few nuances there. It's always all mapped out. Cool. Should we keep moving on? And just a reminder, feel free if you have got a question and either you think we've skipped over or maybe you just want to really ask it. Might be still one we're getting to, but feel free to also add into the Q&A and we can try and take some questions on the fly. I think our panel's skilled enough they can handle it. So far from our answers. There was a similar question, again, it's still on our data theme, still on our monitoring, making sure everything's working nicely. But there was a question about how to monitor sync with, in this case, Salesforce CRM, to making sure that everything is flowing properly. Anyone want to have a go at that one? Maybe Corey? I think it's something you've worked with before.
I'll make it really, really quick because I want other people to chime in here. Okay, so it's limited in what you could do, right? So out of the box UI perspective, you can enable alerts that will tell you when global campaigns fail. And so the only issue is that's every 24 hours. So you're gonna get you'll get an alert every 24 hours because it's not a constant alert. You can incorporate really fancy cloud technical integrations and code integrations that will also allow you to do that. That's not my recommended approach, and you definitely need a very seasoned development team to be able to do that. But it is possible. I've seen it happen. But really the best way to do it is to follow best practices, right? So what do I mean by that? So if you caught Jenny and my RCM campaign build out presentation at Summit, we talked a little bit about this, but basically best practices are you limit the number of campaigns that actually sync into Salesforce. And the reason why is because when it's a free-for-all, you're going to basically have a backlog in your data. And if you have lots and lots of transactions that are happening, sometimes it's not possible, but you really want to try to limit that sync as much as you can, right? Data should flow through RCM, and then the final step of when the data you're pushing over into Salesforce, if it's not automatically already happening, should basically happen when somebody MQLs, somebody out of sales, and so forth. So you want to basically kind of time your syncs are really, really important. But there's also, again, not trying to promote tools or anything like that for third party, but StackMoxie has an awesome Salesforce custom sync monitor that also works very, very well.
Nice. Anyone else on the panel? Thoughts on, doesn't have to be Salesforce. I know they're not all Salesforce CRM sync members on the panel, but is there anything else that you do as well to just keep making sure everything is flowing nicely from your Marketo to CRM?
I'll jump in, John. I'll represent the Dynamics community. I think that was a leading question, wasn't it, from you?
No, I was just making sure you weren't excluded from the...
One of the things I do is I'm on some writebacks. I think Corey mentioned a little bit there. If you were sort of, we also limit or any of the programs or keep number of programs that actually sync into Dynamics down to very few. But what I look for are writebacks. So if I'm pushing an MQL, creating a new lead in Dynamics, what I'm looking for is once a person goes through that MQL process is the writeback of the GUID, of the ID of that lead. Now, when it's converted, so if I know if it's missing, I have a report that runs daily, and it tells me how many have actually flowed in, gone through the lead creation process, but didn't get a lead back to know that it's failed sync there. And then when leads then can get converted into contacts with opportunities against accounts, I have then two separate reports. I look for obviously a funnel status change, which Dynamics pushes over. So I get an SAL or SQL, which is fantastic. But then if I don't either have a contact ID or then an associated account ID off the back of that, I know then there's something wrong on the Dynamics side. And it's been great to sort of find those, because without those kind of write back monitoring reports, if you could leave it a couple of months and then suddenly you find that you've got a big hole in Marketo and Dynamics. And it means that things like Marketo Sales Insights doesn't work too well. Writing back to campaigns, that creates duplicates and you get into a whole lot of sort of pain. So it's good to sort of have those simple reports just to monitor the sync health.
Super. Thanks, Charlie. Any last thoughts? Yeah.
I do think I remember hearing that there are some enhancements on the roadmap for the Marketo Salesforce integration that should help with this. So stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think of the release notes, keep an eye on those. You can find those in Experience League, and often there's a release webinar associated, which will go into a little bit more depth about those. Nice. Shall we move on to a different topic for this? So there was also a few questions that I grouped into just the theme of webinars and events for this. So one specific one was about how can we stop registrations or RSVPs happening on a landing page once that event capacity has been reached. I think, Josh, you've done something like this before. How do you handle it?
Yeah, I've done this several times, several ways. So there used to be, briefly, there was registration caps with Marketo Sky. I'm not sure if that's still available. You can talk to the salesperson, but I'm pretty sure it's gone now. However, there's a few other ways to make it happen, and they all basically rely on an external service. So using a webhook or a self-service flow step to call an external service when someone registers. When they register, you're basically updating a counter to add them to the counter and comparing that to the registration limit. So if they're over the registration limit, you can add them to a wait list or whatever you want to do. If they're under, then you can register them. And then having that external service, change the program status. Also, you can call on that external service or counter to maybe change what you have on the front end as far as messaging around register or wait lists. Those are the best ways to do it. Unfortunately, they do happen outside of Marketo, so you need some sort of service or coding to do that. And typically you want to use the API to check the program member status. So you can update that counter both when people get registered and when people cancel or something like that get removed. There's some sort of solutions, semi-solutions with pure JavaScript where you'd have on your landing page some JavaScript that just counts anytime the form is submitted and keeps a counter. You can use a program token to set the limit, so you still have some control within Marketo. However, those wouldn't account for items that are actions that happen inside of Marketo. So, for example, you have a smart campaign that adds or removes someone to the program. The front-end JavaScript's not going to know that. It also wouldn't handle duplicate registrations. I could go and register with the same name. Obviously, Marketo handles that fine. They're not going to, have duplicate registrations. You're just going to register once for the program, but the front end wouldn't have that. So the best solution is either a webhook or self-service flow step, calling a back-end service or counter to handle that. I don't know if anyone else has any other things that they've used.
Now, you mentioned the use case of a wait list. Did you also use an external service for doing that? Or
yeah, so same thing. You're using that counter to check the registration limit. So you have a limit of 20. When you hit that 20, instead of that program static. So if they're 19 of 20, you get set as registered. If it's 21 of 20, then you get your program status gets changed to waitlisted.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Anyone else on the panel have thoughts on this? I think Josh gave a pretty comprehensive answer there as well. So I think the easiest or the least tech one is taking a waitlist approach where you can use a program status of waitlist before the official registered one, which in the case of a webinar often syncs to that webinar vendor, so you can still, but it does then require that manual intervention to check of the first however many people that registered.
And go back
with that. Yeah, but it is a bit the manual step, and there's obviously a few more advanced tech solutions possible as well, but yeah, need a bit of development there. Cool. We have another question that was a little bit about the limit of live viewing time for a participant for Marketo to consider them as an attendee for that one. I think this one I was thinking about as well, but how you do it, where I think by default, a lot of webinar programs, if you have a third-party integration connect to, it just marks them as attendee if they check in. The latest version of the interactive webinars from Marketo, you're actually able to add a constraint on a flow step that says percentage of attendance time. So I think then it would be something that you probably want to leverage for that as your trigger to move or process of moving people through the program statuses to attendee in that one. That percentage, however, would be up to you, I think, based on the type of event. So for those that were here at the top of the hour, we started with a little bit of housekeeping. Maybe you say that first 10% doesn't count because we're talking not specific detail content, but if you said if they attend 30-40% of it, actually getting into the meat of the content, good enough to mark them as attendee. So yeah, to me, I think if you're leveraging the interactive webinars from Marketo, built into Marketo, something that's much nicer and much more customizable than I've ever had access to in the past. But there.
Yeah, for everyone, if you haven't started using interactive webinars, if you haven't, they're fantastic. At least get in there and play around with them because they're definitely built with Marketo and marketing automation in mind, there's fantastic features.
Yeah, definitely. And that yeah, the options that you get as flow steps and or yeah, triggers and filters and things now that come with it, to look at any kind of interaction within the events is a super nice add-on, particularly when it comes to things like lead scoring, to see if they've actually engaged or asked questions, or maybe you can have a poll question that says, do you want to follow up after this, and triggering off that of a CRM handover. Super nice stuff there. But for those of you that aren't using it yet, we also had a question about some best practices for integration of Marketo with webinar platforms, assuming third-party webinar platforms. Charlie, is that one for you?
Yeah, do you know what, we currently use Zoom Sessions, and it has quite a lot of sort of features to it. Some though aren't as good as interactive webinars, so you know, we can't wait to start using that. But one of the things that we do, you mentioned about constraints, you know, when it comes to sort of best practices, you kind of really want to, before you start organizing the webinar, understand what you want to get out of it. It's that idea of, okay, what is an engagement in a webinar? You might have some people, like you just said, that drop off after the housekeeping slides. You know, that sales conversation with that person is not going to go very well if they didn't get into the meat of the webinar. Likewise, if they're not engaging in any of the content. So interactive webinars, like Zoom Sessions, like others, you can host content. You can sort of put PDFs up there. You can have polls and ask sort of questions. And if you get a lot of unengaged people that attend but then don't appear to engage, then again, you know, what are your expectations when you plan that webinar? What are the triggers you're going to have, reports, and then also segmentations? But what we do is we talk about just simplifying webinar setup as best practice at Kainos. So we try and just tokenize as many things as we can, because when we're creating multiple different sort of webinars from our ops team, we try and tokenize all of the details about the event, the timings, registration form, keep that as simple as possible, as well as then also the program members as well, capturing the specific sort of join links and URLs, having that as a program member field. And then when it comes to actually integrating with the integration partners, using those tokens, using those program fields then to capture things from Zoom, from GoToWebinar, or any other third party integrated sort of partner into that. And then when it comes to the integration bit, I've been on so many Marketo instances where you have someone in the business use their personal sign-on to authenticate in Launchpoint, for example, and then they leave, and then you have to find someone, or that integration times out, and then you've got a webinar happening tomorrow. Try and use like either, in our case with Zoom Sessions, we use the Zoom Marketplace and the API, and then we don't have to navigate things like single sign-on or users, or try and use a generic user, like a sync user for webinars that multiple people have access to, and you have control over that. Does anyone else have any sort of tips?
I think you touched on something when you said about the authentication user. I could see it across the panel.
We've all been there. I think we've all been there before when
survived that. But yeah. I
would say I would echo as you go into leadership, as your career expands, our jobs are, what ends up happening is you're sort of in the system less, and it becomes our job to sort of be the leaders to remove single point of failure. And Charlie just hit on the exact issue that businesses face, is single point of failure. You are designated to be able to identify those downstream issues before they actually become issues. And so as everyone on this call becomes leaders in their organizations, as you all will, because you're learning and listening to the people who have done it. And that's the most important thing, is that single point of failure. If you can identify it, you can save the business so much pain downstream. So just wanted to reiterate that I am fully on board to what Charlie's talking about in terms of you really want to limit that impact as much as you can.
I think that's a probably going to be a common thread through everything. So yeah, it applies so much to what we said about tracking lead source and causing a bad data and working out, you know how much time we spend fixing data, saying, oh, why didn't this lead sync? And you spend so much time digging back through the logs and looking what happened. And if you can limit those points of failure, that's I think the key to success. A good takeaway for that. Let me check. Have we done everything for webinars and events? I think so. But again, don't forget, if you have additional questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. For now, let's move on to reporting. It was a really nice question that I liked, which I thought just going to open up to everyone. The question was, what 3 reports or smart lists can you not live without? But I think if we can just take one or a few, however many you've got, however many you want to share, and just go around the panel. If anyone wants to start, has something in mind.
I would say it depends on the moment, but the person report, being able to add custom columns to reports, and
Yes, agreed. Person status, huge, and people report as well, to be able to track how many different types of values could exist on a potential record is amazing, especially if you have lots of different countries or you have lots of different product values. It allows for you to really hone in on each specific field, and then you can see all of the values that touch a lead, so you get an idea of what governance is going to look like in your systems.
I would say just a reports I've used for like visualization to help gain buy-in between like marketing and sales, and tell the story around attribution is the opportunity influence analyzer. I've just had to pull that up several times with sales leaders when, going back and forth, like, well, what is marketing actually doing? And it's like, okay, well, look at how many touch points this individual engaged with before it turned into a closed won deal. And that's really just helped bring it to life of the importance of marketing and sales being aligned, and how much it's contributing to the work that sales is doing as well. And then there's also, I'm blanking like on the official Marketo name of it, but there's one that's like a funnel velocity report. I don't know if you guys remember it, but it shows bottlenecks of where individuals are getting stuck in your funnel, and you can actually set SLAs and where those are dropping off. And I found that to be helpful in having those conversations with sales as well.
Yeah, is that the Success Path Analyzer report?
Yes, that's the one. Thank you. I was like, what is the name of it?
Do you know what? We use that because we have it's part of our revenue cycle model. We actually have some recycling parts. So if someone's stuck at MQL for such a long time, it comes back to us from sales into marketing. So it's great just to get the heads up on, okay, how many leads are going to come back to us to recycle or look at in the coming weeks. Sorry, John.
Does that make it one of? No, that's all right. I was going to say, I'm glad you did, because I was going to say the revenue cycle analyzer, but the Success Path Analyzer. So good you stepped in.
One issue. It's only once a day. It's not a real-time report, so it has a little bit of a delay to it. So don't expect it to just automatically update right away. But yes, super important report for sure.
No alerting. Yeah. And Charlie, did you have one, or that was your?
Do you know what, the people performance report? The number of times that I've been working on a data problem with our BI team, and so for example, we are currently looking at what we talked about earlier: partitions and workspaces. We have business units and partitions, so we often get a lot of people in the wrong places. And so when we go there and move people into the right kind of person partitions, it can be a nightmare, particularly when you've got one default over several different person partitions. One of the great reports, easy reports I've got, and Josh, you mentioned it, is with the person performance report, is you can pull in smart list columns and it will pivot. And it's great because in one simple table, and I'm quite a data nerd, is you can visualize in a table where the problems are, and you can say, okay, great, let's click on that column, and then you can drill down. You can say, okay, what are the email addresses, what are the regions, or even what are the products that are sort of pushing people into that. So I'm a massive fan of the people performance report.
Yeah, me too. I think when we had the what do we call it? the London Mega Mug, in the bit that I presented there, mentioned this as well, how I use them to find values that are not expected. So like we mentioned, where country values are not right. So I'm saying if create a smart list of, well, I would create multiple smart lists. I think you can add 10 different smart lists into one people performance report. And I would have a column per attribute that I'm tracking. And then you could just see per day of how many people were created that had an exception to what you expected. That was a good way. And that drill down bit, then if you opened up the report, you could then go deeper to find out based on source for that.
Okay, your list, yeah.
So super handy to keep everything smooth and running. Stop the failures. Robin had a question in chat, live question chat. So combining our last topic and this topic. So any recommendations for good reports to use for webinars that are hosted elsewhere, but the program is in Marketo? Maybe Robin, what kind of metric are you looking at? Just general webinar performance, or to go a bit deeper?
It feels like it's a program performance report. So it kind of goes into the idea of trying to get away from vanity metrics. So if you use program statuses really well, and you're following all the best in class kind of statuses, and you really can tell a story with every single program that you build out. This is actually something that I'm battling right now with my current company, is we're trying to be able to get away from just reporting on email clicks and opens and all those various things. Program performance reports allows you to start stepping away from that, and you can actually holistically look at all of your programs that happened over, you know, a quarter or over a year, and you can really, if you do it correctly and you show the correct statuses, it actually is going to give you a better indication of your performance of your programs, and how you can then say, okay, this program performed really well. We got a lot of people to get to the success status, which is super important, right? Every program that you build in your system needs to have some kind of what is success, what is the best case scenario, what is the worst case scenario, right? And if you're able to really capture that attribution, you can tell a story with it. And then you can also, with the whole idea of what marketing's designation is you run a campaign, you look at the metrics and say, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And then it allows for you to be able to grab those metrics and be able to determine, okay, what can we do differently in the future? That's the whole concept of why you want to be able to capture really strong attribution, is because in the future you say, okay, this worked really well, but what worked well, right? And then you can do that deep dive. You can look into those programs specifically. So really great way to get away from vanity metrics as well. But yeah, based on your question, I would say program performance report, because you're not going to really separate, like a webinar is going to be a program, right? Everything's going to be coming into a program of some kind, and be able to monitor the success of that program is going to be based specifically on the performance of the people and how they enter into the program and be members.
Can I?
You can also
see something, but
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can also add the program status as columns onto that report as well. So even though it doesn't give you a relative dimension, you can also then export it to your Excel or wherever, and then just work out some percentages and see which one is converting at a higher attendance rate or something like that.
I was going to add that, John. Sometimes people miss the tick box where they run that report. You need to tick that tick box on the setup, but then also just to add, Corey, you can we use a lot of tags in campaigns, so we help. Then we can run hundreds of webinars in a quarter. But what we do then is use tags and then to narrow that report down. So it's great then. I love that. And that should be another report that we should add to that list. Another report that you can just sort of boil down and see the success of particular webinars against each other.
I would also add the program analyzer. You can break that down by program or channel, and it allows you to determine which programs are best at generating first touch versus like multi-touch, and how it will basically help you prioritize which type of campaign to run when. So that's another one that could be helpful to take a look at as well.
Nice. Thanks, Courtney.
It really depends on what your focus is, what you're trying to do, right?
Exactly.
We like all the programs or all the reporting.
Exactly.
Nice. I think that last comment that you made, Courtney, flows onto another question that we had that was talking about suggestions for backfilling acquisition program for an instance that never actually collected it. So for that report to run, of course, you want to be able to see your acquisition program for things. Josh, maybe over to you for this one.
Yeah. So it goes back into kind of the data quality question. Going going through what data you do have and backfilling. If it were me and you have more of kind of a technical side, I would pull the data from the activity logs through the API and analyze that and try to get to the absolute acquisition program. If you don't have that, you can still export things, use Excel, kind of get to where you need to. But you use the data that you do have in the system. So you have system fields like original source type, and just try to funnel those down to the most appropriate acquisition program. And if you can get to the acquisition program, that's great. If not, you can even create like a generic set of acquisition programs, like content download generic. If you know that someone filled out a content form, but you don't know which asset or which program that they filled that out in, you just know which form, things like that. So work backwards from the data that you do have. And then if for setting that, you can use a set the acquisition program step in a smart campaign, but you can also export them. Sometimes it's cleaner to do it that way and just do it in Excel, get your lists, import them, and set the acquisition program on the import.
Nice.
Thanks,
Josh.
said that.
We'll leave it there. Yeah, no, I think we'll leave it there. We've got 4 minutes left, so maybe 2 last quick questions we'll try and get through. I think these ones, every office hours, Champs office hours I've done, they've always been on the list. But let's just quickly run around and see people's thoughts on Marketo plus AI. Of course, got to be there. So Charlie, I think you've done some nice
John,
presentations on this.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, yeah, that was just open conversation on Marketo plus AI.
Oh, well, yeah, we use actually Microsoft AI with sort of Power Automate as a platform. It was good to talk about that at both at LXA Summit this year as well and at the London Mug. We use AI for a number of different things. Normalization of data. So I talked earlier about data quality and being able to sort of identify and then normalize a lot of data. So you might have countries, for example, like UK instead of United Kingdom, US instead of United States of America. And what we find is that by running fields through Microsoft AI, we can train a model, a large language model to then understand values and then to normalize them into something that matches a CRM pick list. Now, normally we used to do this using an epic lookup table, but you just can't keep up with the number of match values. There's like 5 different ways you could write United Kingdom, for example. So with AI, it learns countries, learns to interpret it, and then you can output values that you can push back into Marketo. So we use a lot of AI for doing a lot of our data normalization.
Yeah. And Josh, I know you've done quite a bit.
I know that Josh is doing some exciting stuff.
A minute or so. We've got one or so use cases just to quickly call out.
Yeah, normalization, segmentation. So figuring out job titles, industries, things like that. It does a great job of that. Content creation in the terms of personalization. So giving it a template and asking it to personalize an email based on a profile, lead data. Filtering things, detecting spam. We used it for that. I mentioned earlier scoring and qualification. We used it to, analyze the lead based on our ICP and give it a score. Go through a list of interesting moments and give a summary to sales. And recently we've been using it for merging records. So you have 2 records you're merging. Usually you have to pick a winner and a loser. In the interface, you can pick which fields win, but we give that to the AI and let that decide which fields are more important and which are better filled out and have it create a AI generated merge.
Nice. Great. Thanks, Josh. And the last topic we just quickly cover is, it's always here as well, but Marketo certification. I think everyone's looking to test the skills, learn a bit more for that. I think for me, I was going to say that there's two main bits for this. One is that there's a new LMS that Adobe's using recently. So there's some great training guides that you can walk through. From that, it's really broken down into modules, links off to all the right places of the Experience League. I think the Marketo Experience League documentation is always really straightforward and clear everywhere. So it sends you to the right places, structures it in a logical way, so you're not just kind of navigating through blindly, but it breaks it and clumps it into great ways. So if you're looking to get one of the certifications, that is definitely a good place to start. There's one for each of the 3 levels of that certification there. I think a lot of people also don't know that if you go into the Cert Metrics portal where you actually go to schedule your exam, there's also a space there for test exams. So if you've not done that as well, always a good way to do that. Not only for like a pre-check before you do your own certification, but also to get a good understanding of how the exam environment looks and feels. That I think it can be a bit, yeah. If you're not sure what you're getting into, it's nice to have that. So then you can, at least one unknown is out of the picture before going into the exam. I know we're right on time, but if there's any like 10, 15 second other tips that panelists have on certifications.
Let's say for the certification, there's the mentor program. Oh, sorry. Right.
Yep,
there's the mentor program that was just running in the community. So if you go on in the community and you can see all of the mentors each have a page and go through all the things that they've posted for the specific exams. There's a lot of great stuff in there.
And many of them have a Q&A, like a little quiz each week as well. So you can use their answers to test yourself. Courtney, you also have to throw it.
Mine is sort of just testing 101, but for the architect exam and the new MCE, a lot of the questions are longer in format. So I had to remind myself of like context clues and things that you had to go back to when you were taking the SAT, just to remember yourself, like best practices for taking exams in general, not spending too much time on the case study, only looking for the key things that you need to focus on. So yeah, I mean, just remembering what that feels like and focusing on that to manage your time.
Yeah. Great. Then that's it. We're at time. Thanks everyone for joining. If you did get to your question, there'll be another office hours next month. So find it on the mug, submit your question, and we'll see you there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.